Just a couple things coming up. As you can imagine, there's not a lot happening in the bringing people together kind of situations. So a lot of things have gone virtually. Our beach cleanup this month, we typically, have our chapter meeting on the second Thursday of the month, and then the following Saturday, we'll usually host a beach cleanup. Our plans to do a big diver cleanup sponsored by Lime Scooters was dashed because, so we're again promoting solo beach cleanups, and I'll be putting a link to kind of the solo beach cleanup guidelines. You can really do that anytime, any day. It's nice to check the tides if you're going to some beaches, but usually even parking lots need to be cleaned and everything washes downstream. So if you're interested in doing a solo beach cleanup, I'll put that information in the chat, as well as a nice thing about that is to collect some data. So I'll also put a link to our data cards that you can email our way. And we're letting Renelle join in. At some point, Renelle, I'm going to put you on the spot for an OFR update, Ocean Friendly Restaurants. But welcome. So yeah, solo beach cleanups this month. And then next month, the beach cleanup, we're doing the Tacoma Shoreline Survey, which is kind of this big, beautiful collaboration between lots of different groups, including Rosemary. Because of things getting rescheduled, the Tacoma Shoreline Survey is also part of Ocean Fest this year. And so it's a big, awesome community science event that really gets every inch of the Tacoma shoreline cleaned up and is a good gauge of how much trash is in place in the Tacoma beaches, and so, or on the Tacoma beaches. And so if you can get out on the 12th and pick up some trash, record that data. I will also, I have a lot of things to share in the chat, but Ken put together a little video that explains the app that they'll use, and he'll just pull reports off of that. So kind of a cool tool that Surfrider, let's get a cool app for our trash collecting. But we'll have that coming up.
It's in the works.
And then, what's that, Liz?
It's in the works.
It's in the works.
It's in development, I think, as we speak. So one day. Keep the dream alive.
And then if you missed it, we had a screening of Whitewash that happened July 30th. There is a link to rewatch that if you didn't get a chance to see the screening of that show, as well as the panel of folks talking about it at the end. I'm excited to catch up with that. And I think that's all I have for kind of event announcements. Of course, I think we might switch up the typical Zoom for our September meeting. So stay tuned for what our chapter event looks like. So to be determined. And then of course, Renelle is our lovely South Sound chapter treasurer. If you could tell us what has been your quarantine comfort and a little bit about ocean friendly restaurants, that would be great. Except you're on mute. I'm gonna unmute you.
What has been my what comfort?
Your quarantine comfort was our icebreaker, but.
Probably my dogs.
Your dogs, perfect.
Yeah, that's easy, and they would be probably pissed off if I said otherwise. Oh my gosh, the ice cream truck's going by, sorry. Anyway, yeah, dogs for sure. Quarantine comfort, and I have 3 of them, so they're sweethearts. But anyway, I don't know what they would do what they're gonna do when this is over, because they're super spoiled now. Anyway, as far as ocean friendly restaurants, we do have one restaurant that we just added. They're actually a new restaurant. They have not opened yet, so there will be, I'll tell you who it is, but it's for Gilman House. They're actually in Stadium District, and they have not opened yet. There was a very soft opening last weekend, and I think this weekend's going to be official, but it's still in the works. So watch our social channels for that official announcement. The majority of their menu is vegetarian or vegan, which is super cool. They they have a gin bar, and I mean, they'll serve you anything, but they are opening as a platinum ocean-friendly restaurant. They're under the same restaurant ownership as Devil's Reef. They were Tacoma's first ocean-friendly restaurant. So anyway, so that's super good news. We're really, really happy to be able to announce any new ocean-friendly restaurants, considering the state of the world right now. So again, watch for that announcement, and whatever you can do to support them and our other ocean-friendly restaurants would be really appreciated.
Perfect. Thanks for that. And then, of course, Gus and Liz, I don't know if either of you have any announcements you want to lay out there. Just chicken cuddles.
I have a couple quick ones. I don't know if Liz does or not, but I can.
Yeah,
no?
good.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah.
I can go. Well, a couple things that we're working on, just kind of prepping for the legislative session coming up in January, is, a really big plastic reduction policy, kind of known. Oh, and I'm getting Zoom bombed here by my little guy.
I'm getting this.
Cool, bud.
And
Hold on
I'm
just a
getting
second.
lots of other kinds.
This is hilarious. So we're working on this concept called extended producer responsibility, which is for plastic packaging and paper products. And there's a lot of different municipalities that are coming together to work on this. And there's some exciting momentum, we feel like, which I think is going to be really good. Really addressing some of these products that are currently not recyclable, and how we can try and require that products that are put into the marketplace, especially like plastic packaging, has to be recycled, and that producers of that are actually paying for that rather than us as consumers. It's going to be kind of a pretty big game changer if it ends up going through. Lots of other countries around the world have already implemented this policy, and if Washington takes this step, we would be the first in the country to do so. So hoping to get that through. And then the other news that's we're stoked about is that Grays Harbor County, where a lot of people like to recreate down in Westport, recently had their shoreline master plan approved by the Department of Ecology. And that was something that we'd been working on with them really via our former Washington Coast program manager, Casey Dennehy, who's no longer on staff, but we've been really actively working on that. And it's kind of a complex thing, but basically trying to preserve the ecological function of the shorelines of Grays Harbor County. Everywhere in Washington that has shorelines has to do this under the Shoreline Management Act. And so how can we protect and improve public access to our shorelines and our beaches that we all love and care so much about? So this is a really big step. It hadn't been done in like over 20 years. So we feel really good about this and some of the new policies that we're able to insert into that. So big win for all who love to recreate along the Grays Harbor County coastline and enjoy the waves of Westport. So pretty stoked about that. Check it out on our website or on the social channels if you want to learn more about that.
Thank you.
And I just have like a quick plug on to continue the ocean friendly restaurants. I do want to just acknowledge that like the South Sound chapter kicks ass at this program, and they have a lot of OFRs registered and continue to grow the program. And so I just wanted to give you guys a shout out for your awesome work in that regard. And also, if you or anybody you know has, is in the restaurant business, we are always looking to highlight our like activist spotlight for ocean friendly restaurants. So if you want to have national recognition on the Surfrider channels about a favorite restaurant you have that is ocean friendly, feel free to give me a shout. Email me, I'll put it in the chat, and we can get that posted. I'm happy to work with you guys.
Cool. And then I know I
have a question about the ocean friendly restaurants. Do you have a list of like BIPOC restaurants that are on the ocean friendly restaurant list?
Not yet. That's something that we're actively working in Surfrider to work on all of those issues. But that is something that I'm hoping we can, there's been discussions, we just haven't like fully implemented a system yet to recognize that. But we are working on that because I would definitely like to see that incorporated for sure, so we can support those businesses.
Yeah. Thanks.
Awesome. And then I know we have Rosemary and Deidre. If either of you have, like, I know there's a lot happening. CHB just put out an email with the tide flats. If there's anything we should know going on with that, or if there's any updates for Tacoma Ocean Fest that you'd like to share. I know that's gone virtual, so floor is open for other announcements, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Sorry, I'm still like super new, but I guess for the Tacoma Tide Flats, we had like a community forum earlier this week. I wasn't able to personally attend, but I did see that we had an increase in our turnout. I also just saw it everywhere on my personal social media, like through several different channels. So it was really good to see that. Kind of working with, right now I'm trying to create a bunch of environmental justice camps. And somehow getting a lot of science kits into the hands of children with space respectfully. But yeah, that's kind of just where I'm at right now. I'm still learning a lot every day.
Cool. And Rosemary, do you want to put a plug for Ocean Fest at all?
In a plug, and I'll try to be really brief, but there's so much to say about Ocean Fest. It's crazy. Can I share my screen for a moment? Because we literally I just sent the posters off to print. If you can let me share, but if you can't, that's okay. So it's all online this year, obviously because of COVID. And I'm so excited that we didn't have to cancel. So basically September the 13th, and the whole Tacoma Ocean Fest idea of arts and sciences and water fun coming together to help people. There you go. You guys see that? Yay! Poster. Designed by Carissa Bennett and with art by Dean Burke, who's one of our artists. I don't know if you know Dean. He's a paddler. CEO of Travel Tacoma, but he also takes these amazing underwater photos out there with swimmers and jellyfish kind of intersecting. So he's one of our artists. We have Fergus Hike is another artist. He's another photographer, Hawaiian outrigger paddler, and also nature photographer. We've got Lords Jackson, who's an amazing muralist who's creating something brand new. That art is all going to be actually physically installed in the Foss Waterways Seaport, which is normally where we have it, but it's going to be translated into live streams and videos and photos, and we're going to have music and dance and aerial circus video premieres. The other really important thing is we're going to have the eco booths, which are all people like yourselves, South Sound Surfrider and others, instead of being physically at a booth. We're asking people to video their booth and put how people can help them protect the ocean, and hopefully link it up to a fun little game people can play online to get rewards. And one of those actions that we're asking people to take is to support early restaurants. Maybe Stina, you guys' video can be about that. That would be great. So that's Ocean Fest in a nutshell. If you want to go to our Facebook and Instagram, and I would love any support you can get, because I just fought a big, weeks-long battle against Facebook with fake pages, and you don't really want to hear it, but it was bad. So thanks for letting me plug that. I also apologize in advance, especially to Emily. I have to leave at about 7:15 because I've got a 7:30 Zoom, because I'm going to be on the radio tonight. So you guys should be finished by then. I don't know if you can see this. It's VT Radio Universal, and it's an East Side community Spanish language radio station. Thankfully, they are hosting it in English just for me. Going to plug Ocean Fest in that, and how to protect the ocean by like Swan Creek and local.
Rosemary, you've heard me talk about a lot of this stuff before, so it's okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. And with no further ado, if you all have more things, feel free to add it in the chat, I suppose. But I want to be able to turn it over to Emily, because we're so excited to have her here to talk about, let me see. I have a whole thing right now, actually. I'm not
Oh,
but we're really excited to have you. I know you're currently the youth volunteer coordinator at the Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium, and you've been wanting to be a marine biologist since you were 10. So way to go, way to represent. You're part of all sorts of amazing groups, including the Sustainable Tacoma Commission, 500 Women and Scientists, the South Sound Urban League Young Professionals Group, and of course, the Washington Environmental Justice Task Force, which I believe you're going to talk more about with us today. So I'm going to turn it over to you to do the rest. But again, we're so excited to have you and learn more. So
yeah.
welcome and
Thank you.
take it away.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. So again, my name is Emily Pinckney. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also very casual, so if you have questions in the middle, just go ahead and ask them. What I'm gonna do is I will hijack the screen at some point, show you some of the things that we're working with, and then what I wanna do is also get those links and then provide them in the chat so that you can look at them again later in the conversation. So just to give you an idea of what the Environmental Justice Task Force is. So Washington State, what happens is we have all sorts of task force to work on certain, hot button issues or issues that we haven't decided on, things like during legislative session. And the Environmental Justice Task Force actually comes out of the HEAL Act, which is the Healthy Environment for All Act. That was a really huge push by the organization Front and Centered. Front and Centered is known as one of the few, and I think actually only, POC-led environmental justice organization that specifically works on Washington State issues. They do a lot of issues like in Seattle and Tacoma, but they really are looking at all of Washington State landscape. It's a really cool thing to be a part of because usually what happens with task forces is that the governor chooses folks who are in these different agencies, so Department of Transportation, Department of Commerce, Agriculture, so on and so forth. The cool thing about this though is they were like, let's also get community voice. And so that's where I come in and a couple other folks. And I will say it's awesome, but it also feels like a lot of pressure because some of us who have that community voice, and even though I've worked on, policy work for a really long time, I've been very involved with advocacy, it's been a journey looking on the inside of what agencies see. The one thing that's also really cool about the Environmental Justice Task Force is that it's the only task force that I know of that has so many folks of color represented on there. And, not just someone like me, but there's Black folks, from the Asia Pacific Islander community, folks, from Mexican American communities, and talking about issues that we experience in our hometowns, in our cities, places that I go, like for instance, the Urban League that I work with, I can bring those issues directly to the table, which is just a really cool experience. So we started last August, actually around this time last August is when the body formed. We had our first meeting at the end of September. And what happens is throughout all these meetings, and good and bad things have happened since COVID, but I'll get there. But since the beginning of these meetings, the point was to be in community for every single one. So our first one we had at the end of September was actually in Lakewood, and we did that at Bates Technical College. And then we had another one in November, which was in Yakima. But like I said, this task force process has been really different than the other ones because we're trying to think of the barriers of entry to participating in government as well as environmental justice task force needs. So a really important part was making sure that we're in community centers, that we're in local churches, that we're in places where, the folks who are harmed the most by environmental hazards, so Black and brown folks from low-income areas, making sure that we're in their places and talking with them directly. Also making sure that we have things like, even though there's Washington State rules around childcare and food, we've found ways to get around those. We've also found ways to shift our schedule because a lot of times these task force meetings happen from 9 to 5. People work, people have jobs. And so a lot of the community can't be a part of those conversations. So we've shifted some of our meetings from 1 p.m. to 8 p.m., which can be kind of a miserable day for some of us because we're up in the morning and then we're just doing work all day long. But it's been really important for that community engagement element because what happens is we start out our day working on the process, and by the end of the day, when people are off work, they come with their families, they eat dinner with us, and then we talk about what problems are impacting them, and we put all of that, every single piece of that, into the recommendations. And so what's going to happen by October 31st, we have to give recommendations that we voted on to Governor Inslee. Part of what those recommendations are fortifying the environmental laws that already exist. So making sure that we cover up all those loopholes, also making sure that we put an equity lens on those loopholes. So that's been a big deal too, making sure that we have environmental justice in mind. So if there's something that's going to be impacting, like, I'm from Tacoma. So if something's going to be, positively impacting the north end of Tacoma, that it's also going to positively impact the south end of Tacoma, making sure that the burdens are actually gone, which was a very interesting conversation, because when we talk about environmental injustice, we talk about the fact that certain communities have a higher burden and some communities have a higher benefit. But what we realize is it's like, we don't want to spread out the burden. We want to eliminate it all together, which has been a very difficult conversation to have, because we know those burdens are still there because fossil fuels still very much exist. And then talking about how we want this to be a part of each agency. And that could be at different levels, but each agency, we've realized, has some sort of interaction with the environment. And what does that look like? Department of Natural Resources has an interaction, ecology has an interaction with the environment, transportation has an interaction. And then talking about the type of trauma and harm that's been caused by those agencies. So like, for instance, when we're talking about Department of Transportation, they put highways straight through communities, and that has been impacting communities. And those communities being impacted has really broken the tether that people have to the environment and nature. And so we've had a lot of different conversations about what this looks like. And so let me share my screen with you now. And our next meeting, by the way, our next public meeting is actually September 11th, Friday, September 11th, from 9 to 5. And we put a lot of our public comment at the beginning. However, like I said, it's a really casual process now. We ask for public comment at any point, which doesn't really happen a lot with these types of processes. It's usually like, this is the public comment period. If you're not here for it, you have to turn it in online. Otherwise, you don't get heard. We don't do that. We understand everybody's lives are different and that they can come in and out of the conversation when they need to. Now with Zoom, there have been, I would say we've lost the opportunity to intentionally connect with people in their homes, but it has been more accessible for people to be in the conversation anywhere that they're at all day long. Which has been really helpful. And I think the process of us all having to have these meetings by Zoom, again, has actually been surprisingly beneficial. We get really concerned about the accessibility of, computers and phones and being a part of that. But I think that we've found some really good strategies of working on that. And that's working with folks who are heads of community groups or organizations. So like, for instance, we worked with the head of Shiloh Baptist Church, and we did a separate town hall before we had our public meeting. And then we talked to the folks in the church and said, do you all have access, to a computer or a phone to be able to join this meeting? If not, here are some strategies of doing that. So it's been really cool. And I've been really excited about all the equity and accessibility things that we've included. But right here, so this is the health equity disparities website. And then this is where Environmental Justice Task Force lies. Getting an environmental justice task force, the way we were able to do it was to include Department of Health and Department of Ecology in this process. Human health has been a really big factor into making this a reality, because a lot of us have been talking about this for a while, and we're like, how do we get the buy-in from all these other folks in Washington? And, again, I live in Tacoma and we have some of the worst air quality. And so it's a really, this has been a really helpful strategic way of having the environmental justice talk. But here's, like I said, here's the website here, and I'm gonna put this in our group chat. And let me go down to here are the folks. So here are the folks that are involved in this conversation. So like I said, there's folks who are representative from different agencies, but then there's also community-based folks. So here I am in here, and then we have some other folks who are involved as well. We also have like labor representation, agricultural representation, and Washington Business Association as well. And then what I'm gonna do, like I said, I'll give you this information. Elise is absolutely fantastic. She's the manager of this task force. Please send her any questions that you may or may not have. And also, please come to these meetings. We really take public comment seriously. And I will share with this at the end of the presentation, but we are in a process right now where we're about to vote on these recommendations. And some of them are really like, I mean, Gus, you're talking about game changers. This is it. These are some game changing things for environmental policy in this state, as well as game changing things for, you know, communities of color and involvement in communities that have been silenced for all this time. So one of the really cool ways that we've been able to engage and, you know, get people to be a part of this conversation is that we've created these 2 subcommittees. And one of them is revolved around this map, the Washington Environmental Health Disparity Map. That map has been worked on and started in development at the end of 2017. I was part of, you know, an EJ map summit. I forgot the name of it, something like that. But we were working on what the map needed. And that was started by University of Washington and Front and Centered. And so they worked on this really fascinating map. And so I already put in my zip code, but this map, the interesting thing about it is this tells us about health, but there's some really cool factors to it that, you know, we added on based off of what the community said. This is how you find us. This is how you count us, because we use census tract data to get demographics. But then thinking about places like Yakima, where you have a large amount of folks who are undocumented and don't go counted, who are, you know, having these impacts, these environmental hazardous impacts, hitting them the worst, we're like, how do we consider folks? So we thought about all these different creative ways to count people. One of them was how many folks are listening to Spanish-speaking radio stations. Rosemary, you're about to go on one. But that's how we found and counted people, and that's how we made sure that they were included in the count. So what you can do, so like I said, I put in my address right here. Here, I actually have to move all of our faces. Sorry, y'all. We're on the way. There we go. But here, you can zoom into the map. Can everybody see this fine? Yes? Okay, cool. I got a thumbs up. And so what you do is you look up different things. So here you have environmental health disparities, diesel pollution and disproportionate impact, social vulnerability to hazards, lead exposure risk, health disparities, and then planning for health, which I think this one's very important, especially right now during this COVID context. We've been having a lot of conversations about what this will look like and how communities will be able to repair after this. So you can look up different exposures. Whoa. So you can see things that are from 8 to 10, those are the communities that are high focus. So let me just scoot out just a bit. So you can see right here, a lot of places in Tacoma, these are all 10. But then you go over here to Ruston and it's a 3. And I mean, I work over here in Point Defiance and I live over here on the hilltop. That's about a 15-minute drive. And the health disparities are grand. These areas right here, what this is indicating is the different environmental exposures. And so things like, you can look at diesel emissions, ozone concentration, PM 2.5. And then you can look at things like socioeconomic factors. Oops, sorry about that. Let me zoom in a little bit more.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
Does this also get at some of the legacy of toxic pollutants, like from the Sarco smelting facility previously?
Yes. So yeah. So this right here. So this is the thing that there's some things in here that we've done super awesome, and then some things that I think we're lacking a little bit. We do talk about legacy toxic sites, but the thing is that it only is from the baseline in which this was tested, because that was actually something that we talked about in our last meeting. Is that, are we going to continue to improve this map and work on it each year to see what it looks like now? We do talk about legacy sites, but I don't believe that we have a factor for that. I'll look and see if we have an overlay. But like, for instance, I know another thing we talked about was like, this is all technically like Puyallup tribal land. We don't have, you know, what historical markers there are. We only have current day, like political boundaries and tribal boundaries. So, but yes, thank you for bringing that up, because that's something that we definitely, there's a lot of things that can improve. I know one of my big things, and this is from the marine biology standpoint, I'm like, why don't we have more data on the water? Like, there's like no data on the water. All the things that we have are tracked on land, but you can see the water here is gray. And I'm like, we need to know what's going on here as well, especially because like this is all the port here. This is all in the 100-year floodplain. So, but again, we're hoping that it'll improve, but this has been a huge tool and been very successful for what we're doing. This also has real numbers for people. So when they're filling out grant applications and when they're asking for budgeting, that this is something that the departments have to use. This is part of the process. This map, as well as the community engagement subcommittee. So the map and then the community engagement subcommittee, which we made like an 11-page list of just bullet points of barriers of entry to participating in the public process. Those two things agencies have to use when making any decisions in the environment. But yeah, I just want to show you some of these things here. So things like, you know, limited English. So for instance, like well, the port also is not the best example because there's people aren't living directly on these parts, but like going back down here, more places like, you know, South Tacoma and East Tacoma. These places right here, it's a mixture of like, okay, there's limited English. And now let's also look at, you know, lead risk of housing. Same exact areas that have limited English also have these higher risks of lead from housing. And so this actually is the data. These are the numbers so that when people, you know, when we have conversations saying these are the communities most impacted, it's nice because we don't have to sit there and explain it. The numbers are telling the story. But see right here, we have a lot of different places. So you can look at city limits, county boundaries, tribal land boundaries, zip codes, 100-year flood zone. This one's my least favorite, but also favorite to look at. It makes me sad, but also is so important to see. Or like this one, ethnic radio stations, or like farm worker housing, prisons. So yes, so all these things here, Superfund national priority list, the list goes on. But this is a really, really cool tool, and I'm gonna just drop it in the chat now. So even if I'm talking and if someone's like me and has ADHD and wants to play, go ahead. So let me put this in here for you. Give me 1 second. There we go. So yeah, so that's that right there. So this is what we've been using, but let me go on. I'm sorry, I can't deal with these controls. Here we go. Okay, so right now, this is the environmental justice definition that we're working with. And who knew that this was going to be one of the most important pieces of the process? Right at the beginning, when we started this process last September, you know, we used the EPA definition, and we used the definition that Oregon State Environmental Justice Task Force and California Environmental Justice Task Force used. Their task forces are also very different. Oregon started their task force as a need to work with rural communities and poaching. California, theirs was a lot more wealth centered and very, very centered on the fossil fuel conversation, which is important. But we tried to make sure that we answered a couple different questions here because fossil fuels, of course, is a huge issue up here, but there's also so many more. And we also wanted to make sure that, again, the communities whose voices haven't been a part of the conversations were centered here. And so right now, this is our working definition, which again, could change all the way up until the end of October. We've been trying to be very flexible. And then also asking the community to give us their opinions of what they think should be involved here. So the definition is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies, including focusing on addressing disproportionate environmental and health impacts by prioritizing highly impacted communities, equitably distributing resources and benefits, and eliminating harm. So pretty much that last part after policies is pretty much what we like added on after the EPA definition, because the EPA definition doesn't really talk about those communities that have been silenced, who haven't been a part of it. But this becomes really important when we start talking about the recommendations. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these because there are so many, but I really encourage you all to take a look at these. We had pretty much spent our entire meeting going through these recommendations, and they range. They have a huge range. Some of these, you know, we as a group 100% agreed on. And some of these, some agencies were like, we absolutely will not do that because of money or whatever, so on and so forth, budgets, whatever excuses, to not have equitable environmental policy. So like right here, we have some of them talking about tracking and evaluating and publishing, making sure that communities are involved with those processes. This one right here, achieving EJ and equity as part of their strategic plan. We all agreed on this one here. Agencies will have at least one staff position dedicated to integrating EJ principles specifically and equity more broadly into agency actions. We agreed on these. And then, convening a permanent EJ group. This one we agreed on. I'm trying to think. So these ones here. So these are some of the ones where there are some agency groups that have been like, we don't know if we want to do that. But a recommendation like this is how you get everybody to come to the table to talk about how to fight climate change. This one right here is talking about increasing financial investment for community engagement by amending RCWs. Washington State isn't allowed to feed people. They're not allowed to give people stipends for sharing their time, their money, their energy. Data mining is a huge issue when it comes to having conversations about the environment. And data mining, for folks who don't understand that concept or really know what that means, is that means taking information from these folks in these communities and then using it, either for policy or for whatever you're doing, but not giving compensation back to the people who shared their stories and shared their time. Things like I said, childcare. Some people have to travel. I know right at the beginning of the environmental justice process, before I was working with Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium, I was working up in Seattle. And the job that I had, without, throwing shade, they barely paid me anything for the work that I did. And so, and as a community member, people who work in the agency who are part of the task force, they get paid for their time to be there. So all the agency representatives, that's work time. But me and all the people from the community who are there to talk about what they need and talk about, what's happening in their homes, in their hometowns, they don't get paid. They were not compensated. And folks aren't given money to travel to some of these spaces. And so it really hinders the process. And so things like that, we want to just expand that and making sure that people are able to do it. And then this is a new one, access to broadband for remote meetings. Especially with COVID, this is something that we've been thinking about a lot more. But like these types of recommendations, what I think, especially the request for a group like this, especially because it seems like there's some advocacy that you all can do, is we need people to show up to these meetings and talk about how important these recommendations are and supporting them. Because there are, again, some agencies that are like, we don't want to do that. But the thing is that it's a cyclical problem. And the problems, especially that we have with environmental policies, they continue. And then this was a really important one too, contracting with local community organizations, trying to make sure that we have, I don't know if you know anything about the Washington State contractor lists, people that, the Washington State government chooses for projects or jobs, making sure that we look to more community-based organizations instead of using the same very expensive contractors who may not know anything about the community that they're working in. And yeah, and then there's some other ones here too. So mandated use of environmental health analysis. So that that map is one of those. And then here's more of those revenue sources. But yeah, I'm trying to see if there's anything else here that was really, and then this is a huge one. Creating a statewide reparations task force. And reparations in the context of environmental justice is things like, colonization, land theft, things like internment, things that we haven't talked enough about. But this also is talking about things like, employment. We want to be able to have clean, green jobs. And there's folks, especially in low income brackets, where there's certain jobs that they're trained to do and are able to do. But a lot of those jobs are these fossil fuel oil jobs. We had somebody, a community member, speak, and she said, I'm so sick of fossil fuels. They're poisoning me and my family. She said, but I also need to be aware that half of my family, those are the only places that they've been employed. Those are the jobs that they have. And when we do make certain regulations in Washington, and if we want to ban those fossil fuel groups, we need something in replacement, because those fossil fuel groups will go to places like Atlanta or Texas and find other communities of color and other low income communities to exploit. And then in Washington State, we just won't have the jobs. And so an important thing is thinking about market transformation and thinking about how do we actually have a green economy, as well as having green jobs available for folks. So yeah. Any questions so far? I'm just spitting off the dome here. But here, I'm also going to include these here too for you all. And that's pretty much everything.
For the meeting that's happening on September 11th,
Mhm.
how I guess maybe what would be the information we need to get involved with attending that?
Yeah, so the information, so what I'm gonna do, I'm right now giving you a couple links. So this page right here, okay, sorry. So this page, actually this page. So this shows all of our meetings. This also shows like meeting materials. So like for instance, like, this is our last meeting, the agenda and materials. We do have a task force work group meeting coming up August 18th to talk about some of those recommendations that people like were, in disagreement on or needed more context. But all of our meetings are public. Even if we have a work group meeting, even if we're like, oh, we need to refine whatever this recommendation is, every single thing is public, everything is transparent, which is why I encourage people to go to as many as they can. But I'm gonna send this to you all now. We usually do, like I said, official public comment is in the morning, but you really can comment the entire time. Like if we're talking about something and you have something you need to say, you can write it in the chat. And we really try to make sure that we keep our eyes on the chat and bring up those questions immediately, or there's someone answering the questions the entire time. Yeah, I think that's all of those. Here, I'll stop sharing my screen now. Oh, hello again. But yeah. Does anyone have any questions at all? I feel like I spoke very fast. I apologize. My third presentation of the day.
All right. Well, first, little round of applause. Thank you so much for all that good info and all these great resources. And yeah, any questions from Marty? Marty, I'm gonna okay, good.
I did. Well, first of all, I'm a member of the League of Women Voters, and I would love to have you come talk. So we'll talk.
I'd love to.
I have a question. It's always concerned me, and not just about environmental justice, but kind of in general. Is our country is based on the concept of equality, and that hasn't happened. And so now the problem is that in order to fix that, my concern is that people think they can fix it by making things equal. But they can't fix it by making things equal. We have to have equity, and equity is different than that.
Yes.
And I'm wondering with environmental justice, how do you market equity over equality?
Yeah, you said it yourself. Equality's never existed in this country, ever. It never has. We're still working towards Black liberation. It's never existed. So for instance, a great equity example, we're working on a tree planting project here at Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium. The North End's got a lot of trees. They don't need to be planted there. And so what needs to happen is they need to be planted on the south end and the east side of Tacoma. And folks who are part of that process understand that, but equity is, especially equity in the context of policy is on so many different levels. A first level is early and often, making sure you're working with the communities who are out of the conversation early and often. So if you're gonna go do something in a community that, has dealt with inequities for years, you need to make sure that they're part of the conversation and letting you know what they need. A lot of times what happens is we try to do something that we think is equitable, but what we really do is kind of like, colonize the situation, take over the situation and say, this is something that needs to be done. This is the way that you do it. And I think they're also, in terms of environment, is giving education as well as taking education. Especially a lot of environmentalists, when we enter spaces, we're like, oh, I need to tell this group of Black folks all about fossil fuels. You need to know. The thing is like, even if, someone's not a climate scientist, they know what it's like for their child to have asthma. They know what it's like to have lung issues. Listen to them talk about that first. Listen to that and then say, well, we have some strategies on fixing that. And believe it or not, sometimes the community has better strategies. I know a lot of us have been working on these things for a long time, but especially in terms of equality and equity, equality is not a pie. And I think a lot of folks, especially right now with the Black Lives Matter movement, are like, oh, what do I have to give up for Black folks to be able to have what's equal to me? And I think it really, and I understand that I also have privilege. I have the ability to go to college and get an education, and I had parents who were supportive and there for me, and I grew up middle class. And so what you have to do is you have to humble yourself at the door and say, these are all the privileges that I've been given, and I have this power. And so you have to use your power to help uplift other communities and help them recognize their power, not empower them, help them recognize it, because they have it. everybody's powerful. I mean, that's why I work with youth. I'm like, we've been doing awful at the climate movement. The youth yelled for a year, and now we're all talking about climate change. So it's helping them recognize that power and giving them the energy and the resources and tools to do that. That's what we really try to do with this environmental justice process. Is the communities already know what they need, and a lot of them already know what their problems are, but they don't have the microphone. They don't get to speak on it, and they don't get to make that decision of what they want next. And sometimes there is an education element. I know, like, you know, I work with the Tacoma Urban League, and like for a really long time, you know, I was like, let's have an environmental justice event. And it took me years before we had it, because what I was trying to tell people is like, you guys, environmental injustice is a Black issue. That's our issue that we have to deal with because it's been put onto us, you know, by white supremacy. But that's something that we need to be concerned about. It's something that impacts us directly. And so that's why, especially talking about health, has been a really good way to say, this is how we lift up this community. I mean, that map is a great example. I mean, you're talking about marketing equity. You see Ruston is, you know, dark blue, and then the Hilltop is dark red. Like, the numbers are right there. And so you can say, go ahead and help your neighbor, because at the end of the day, I mean, wind blows, water flows. It's gonna end up in our backyard if we don't help our neighbors, so.
Yeah, I'm thinking, you know, I think of schools, but so I'm trying to translate that a little bit because I was a teacher a little bit. But it just, what makes me happy is, you know, that I'm looking forward to all of this unrest, be it the pandemic or the Black Lives Matter or the economic situation, that things will be different.
Yeah.
And I think that happens is we white folk, we with white privilege, we think that, oh, well, by fixing it or by whatever you want to call it, we'll just make it more like ours. And I think what we become much more accepting of is that no, it's very likely to be very different. That, like you were saying, the people that you go to in these neighborhoods that are being affected, they know what's going on, and they sometimes have solutions better than anything you could present. It's good. It could very likely look very different than what I've been used to. And so we have to learn to give on that. And our tax dollars, if the tax dollars are paying for me to have my situation, then those same tax dollars have to go towards this different picture of that same situation. Do you know what I mean?
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. It's like, you know, especially like a lot of the work that I've done on like Sustainable Tacoma Commission. So we're actually going to be creating an environmental justice working group. So that's something we're really excited about. And we're pretty much just like, if people want to be on it, like we have like, you know, an application where we're encouraging folks who are from these unheard communities to join it. But we're pretty much just like, if 100 people sign up, we're going to ask the city for 100 stipends because we need these voices. That's exactly what we need. We want folks to come to the table. We want them to come to this room. And like you said, the environmentalism might look different, but what we've found, and the data like shows it, is that the communities that are, you know, unheard, the ones who are impacted the most by environmental injustices, have actually been more effective at fighting climate change. Because, you know, it's interesting because sometimes what happens is if you're a person who's in privilege and you got a beautiful backyard with all these trees, you're like, climate change is bad and I love the environment, but you know, I'm going to do these tiny little initiatives. But if you're someone who has a power plant in your backyard and you fight to shut down that power plant, that's huge. And that's what people sometimes don't understand about the conversation, or they don't understand about how impactful these communities can be in this context. So yeah, you're right. It does look different. But I will say it's a lot more holistic and it's a lot more fun. I've had so much fun working with folks from all these different communities. Like we went to Yakima, we had this huge dinner. Everybody's talking in all these different languages. We're talking about the things we do for fun and all of our different nature stories. Everybody has an environmental story. Everyone has a nature story and connects with nature. It's just in different ways. And I think sometimes we're like, this is the way you do environmentalism, but we need to start thinking of intersectional environmentalism, because conservation is not a plant or an animal problem, it's a people problem. So,
good.
You know,
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I'll be in touch.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
So much fun stuff to think about. It's so exciting. I do want to recognize that it is 7:33, but I don't know if folks have more questions or what the vibe is. I know I saw Gus just shared Kay's story. Super, read that. That's a beautiful example of.
You see the chicken messages?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I wanted to find out, okay, so you mentioned that there's been some pushback on some of those items. I'm wondering how much pushback, if you can comment.
Yeah, so
versus how much support.
I'm so okay with being public about it because these meetings are public. So, so the pushback specifically comes from Department of Commerce, Department of Transportation, and the Washington Business Association. And then we did have some pushback earlier from the Farmers Bureau, like right at the beginning of the process, because they're like, why are we talking about racism? And I was like, oh boy. But they haven't had that since. So we're like, cool. But a lot of the pushback has been around money and like saying, well, you know, we would have to change our budgets and all this. And we're like, yeah, we want to be environmentally just. This conversation's about environmental justice. And then when we had conversations around reparations, and I was like, hey, you guys know environmental justice is a form of reparations, right? I think that word just scares people and they're like, oh my gosh, does that mean we're just gonna send every Black person a check in the mail? I mean, even though I think I deserve it, that's not what we mean. What we mean is having more training opportunities, more job opportunities, and just, you know, fixing the pipeline, because it's a leaky pipeline to get to, you know, a place where you can work on environmental justice and focus on that. And so that's, I know, a huge part of it too. But yeah, no, a lot of the pushback has just been like finance related and money related. And it's been honestly excuses, because we talk about reprioritizing the funds. There's a lot of projects that we're already working on, and a lot of projects that all these different state agencies are already doing. And we're like just making sure that you check in with those communities and just like move around funds, which is again possible. But that's, I would say that's the biggest pushback so far.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. And then, oh, just something just to throw in there too. Like I said, so this Environmental Justice Task Force has just been formed this last year. We want it to become a permanent task force. And we also will be, the front and center will be relaunching the HEAL Act. So that's something that will be talked about during legislative sessions. So just to keep that all on your radar, the HEAL Act will need support.
Well, that was going to be kind of my question, Emily, was if you foresaw recommendations coming out of the task force turning into legislation, and if there might be opportunities where we might be able to help support.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, thank you so much for that, Gus. So the HEAL Act, that will be relaunched, not knowing exactly what it looks like right now, but I think it'll be very similar to what it was before, as well as, you know, having some of that recommendation lens on top of it. But we're really hoping that the governor says yes. We're like, you're running for re-election, so please be that green guy that we know you are. Like, you're running on the green ticket for president, so do it here for us. And so that's a huge hope that we have right now, is that we can kind of utilize the fact that this is an election year, and that he'll say yes to hopefully all those recommendations. Because right now that's really it, is like, you know, we're making the recommendations, we're putting the time and energy, but like, he could say no. Like, he could say no to all these amazing things that we've done, all the work that we've put in there. So we're really hoping he doesn't. But I think we also are kind of like, well, if you say no, we're putting it in the HEAL Act. So yeah.
Well, maybe a follow up on that. Are there activities either that you personally or groups that you're working with are doing to help support BIPOC candidates this election cycle?
I mean, I will say I am personally.
I know we all have to like wear those different hats and watch what we say and all that bullshit.
Yeah, no, I am personally, I hosted Tawana's climate justice phone bank, and I did a couple environmental justice talks specifically to there, because there's so many Black women who are running in this election. So I've been trying to talk with them and, you know, get them to do, you know, because there's a bunch of like climate pledges out there. And I think that's really something that we're focusing on, is making sure that the folks, you know, who are going to go into office and the folks that we want to uplift into office, that they have that environmental lens, because there's going to come a day where they're going to have to make decisions on some of these environmental justice things, and we need their support. And I think I've been trying to encourage a lot of environmental orgs to go and talk with these Black candidates, because I will say, I mean, I've talked to some Black candidates and they're like, I want to be able to work with these groups, but they've been reaching out to all these folks, and it's hard because there's still that distrust. That's a huge thing still. There's still a lot of distrust between folks in environmental communities and Black communities, even though Black folks, we care about the environment, but I think there's still this idea that, you know, we think like, oh, well, they probably think I don't care about the environment, or they won't talk to me because I've never talked about the environment. But again, there's certain intersectional contexts where even if a Black candidate hasn't talked about climate change or environmental justice, they've encouraged things that encourage fighting climate change or encourage, you know, conservation. Like, you know, for instance, Tawana, the environmental justice camp, I remember I helped her with that back in like 2017 with CHB. And like, that has been something that's been going on. And someone asked me, they're like, when has she cared about climate change? I was like, well, she cares about, you know, health quality impacts. And so she cares about fossil fuels, you know? And so having those conversations is really important. And some candidates just need the language. Like I said, we may not all be climate scientists, but a lot of us have been fighting climate change for a long time. So yeah. Any more questions? I feel bad. It's already 7:40. I could talk all day.
We appreciate that. No, this is so good. And we do have a recording, so we need to, we'll get that up on the YouTube. Thanks, Liz. I'll share that details with you. But yeah, just thanks again, everyone, for joining tonight. And good to see your virtual shining faces. And yeah, I think we'll probably put a bow on it for now. But I think if you want to reach out, hopefully we can, I don't know.
Yeah, I put my email in there and I put a bunch of the EJ task force stuff in there. And if someone's really bored later, go ahead and play with that map. It's super fun. Also very depressing, but it's data that we can use.
It is important, yes.
It's important.
And of course, South Sound Surfrider, you can reach us on Facebook or Instagram, all those good social media channels. So we're around and available, and yeah, hopefully we might cross paths while we're doing solo beach cleanups in the near future. So we'll have to see. Mike, are you saying something? If you're saying something, you're muted. Anyways, woohoo! I don't know. Go team.
Right. Thank you all. Thank you for having me.
Emily, thank you so much for joining us. It was really
I hope to see
have you. And
I know, as I said, I hope to see some of you or hear some of you on September 11th. Again, every public comment is worth it. So please go ahead. You can write it in the chat. You can say it out loud. We will record it. So also, like, know what you're saying before you say it.
Thank you so much for the presentation and all you do, Emily.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Can we
Thank you
get
all.
access to the chat after this is over?
You should be able to save the chat if you recorded the video. Sorry,
yes,
I'm like,
so I think, yes, that is true.
There's a little option